Hello and welcome to the No Limitations podcast, a show where we talk to people who have achieved outstanding success in their careers and discovering the influences that have shaped their destinies. I'm your host, Greg Robinson, Managing Partner of Blenheim Partners Executive Search and Board Advisory Firm. Today, in this very special episode, I'm in the offices of David Gonski, Chairman of the Australia and New Zealand Banking Group. We'll be discussing the structure of boards, education, the business and political climate, and what David would like to be remembered for.
Stand up for righteousness. Stand up for justice. Stand up for truth.
I truly believe that thoughts are the greatest vehicle to change.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Victory in spite of all terror. Victory however long and hard the road may be.
To those waiting with bated breath for that favourite media catchphrase, the U-turn, I have only one thing to say. U-turn if you want to. The ladies not for turning.
We do not care whether the cat is black or white, as long as it can catch mice.
Welcome to No Limitations, David.
Nice to be here, Greg.
David, an outstanding career. Where did it all begin?
Well, it depends how far back you want to go, if you want to go into prehistoric time or whatever. But for me, my career began basically as a young lawyer. I still, I have to confess, think like a lawyer. And I spent 10 years in the law. And I had a wonderful period of meeting corporate Australia.
But what made you go to law to start with, David?
It's a good question. My father was a brain surgeon, very keen that I should continue the family business. Unfortunately, the barriers to entry were quite high. But I had decided by the time I was 14 that blood, patients and whatever were not really my strong suit. And so I started to really think I'd like to be in problem solving. And my first reaction was to be an architect. I liked the idea of looking at a site. Even when I was 16, I remember doing that, thinking what could be built there, how it could be built, how you could make it sustainable, and so on. Unfortunately, I couldn't draw, and this is pre-computers, and so I didn't think my sustainability as an architect would be strong. And as I was a strong debater at this school, I decided that I'd become a barrister, which indeed I never did.
Where did you grow up, David?
Well, I spent the first 7 years of my life in Cape Town, South Africa, where I was born. We came here many years ago, and Australia's been a wonderful place, and I grew up in Sydney.
So you followed the law, then you joined Freehills, and you became, well, at the time, the youngest ever partner during that decade at the age of 25. I guess the question is, how did you stand out? What were the skills? What was the expertise that you brought to the table?
I was very lucky. What happened was that in the late 70s, everything was opening up in corporate Australia. We had coming to the end of exchange controls. We had new corporate laws. We had a new thing called the Trade Practices Act. And therefore, the fact that you were very young was actually an advantage. You'd studied it at university. You knew the various aspects. And most of these aspects were not really known by the existing practitioners. In addition, I was one of the new group who had actually studied commerce as well as law. A lot had done arts law before, and indeed a lot had done just law. But doing commerce law was seen as a great advantage, which it was, to be an accountant as well as being a lawyer and to understand the new regimes that we were dealing with. So why did I become a partner young? Because we started to get into mergers and acquisitions like never before. And the fact that you were young, quite keen, and indeed well experienced in terms of the law, because no one else really was, to be quite honest, the new laws, gave you a great advantage.
And how did you make the transition out of law into business?
I think that from the very start, I realised, even though I had this aspiration that I was going to be a barrister, that although I do love the law, I actually found the law a little bitsy. That basically a problem occurs, they come to see the lawyer, you either fix it or maybe in my case make it worse, And then what happens is that the client goes away until, unfortunately, they find themselves in need of a lawyer again. I didn't like that. Immediately I realised that there's this whole world of business, and whilst I was happy to be involved where there were problems, I was particularly keen to be there from the start right through to the finish.
When you commenced your career in business, you were promoted to the boardroom at a fairly young age. What age were you when you had your first NED opportunity?
I think I was 27 when I got my first NED opportunity. In the days of mergers and acquisitions, you got very close to the people who were doing the buying, the people who were under the pressure to try and work out what to do with new companies and new holdings in companies. And in the case of a company called Bridge Oil, which was my first directorship, one of my clients had bought quite a big holding, and it was logical for me to go on the board.
There's no doubt you have a reputation. I think you're known as the chairman of everything. Where do you see the state of the boards today?
Well, before I answer that, a lot of people say I'm the chairman of everything, but I think I should quickly say to you, Greg, I am the chairman of only a few things.
Okay.
I've been very lucky over many, many years to have many chairmanships and indeed many director positions. But I think that having a good mix of both directorships and chairmanships, of for-profits and not-for-profits, is very important. Having too many, I accept, is not a good thing either. In terms of where the boardroom is today, it's a very different place to where it was when I first started, now almost 40 years ago as a director. I find that we are indeed much more involved as directors than we used to be. I think the community has much higher expectations of directors, and quite often the expectation of directors is in fact a little bit higher than what directors actually do. Many people, for example, believe that the chairman is the boss of a company. In my opinion, very squarely, the CEO is the boss of the company. And indeed, the chairman has a very important role, but the CEO runs the company.
Do you think the board is getting too active these days, David? Do you think they're coming in over the top or almost being encouraged based on the focus on corporate governance in this country?
I think, firstly, it's a very bad thing to generalise. Some people on boards always want a medal and others want to be on the periphery. Something in the middle is probably the right thing. I think, yes, there is an absolute open invitation to boards to get more involved. And I think boards that don't get involved enough are very dangerous. But definitely those boards that get too involved, don't allow management to manage and start meddling, are also dangerous.
Do you think we have the right board structure and board model?
I think we have a good structure. But I think, we've got to think as time goes on whether it is a structure that really meets with the expectations, both of the stakeholders who invest in us and indeed those who rely on the companies as customers and indeed as staff. I've always been attracted, and if you look, and knowing you, Greg, you've done that, I've written over the years very strongly in support of an Australian version of what applies in Germany.
I read that a couple of times.
Namely, the two-tier model, the model where you have a supervisory board and indeed a management board which manages the company. I actually think when you look at the way we look at our laws at the moment, that's probably the way we see the board, that they're actually managing. And in fact, all of us know it's the management team that should and does manage the company.
You present that case, David. Where do you see the strengths of that case? Is it really a shift of liability, or is it actually running the board structure where people have full control, i.e. the exec team make the decisions and are accountable for the decisions, and the board have the oversight of review of the strategy and execution of that strategy? Why that model, David?
I think that model allows the supervisory board, firstly, to provide advice, assistance, and actually a good look at where strategies and growth, etc., are coming from. It should relieve, in a supervisory model, the board from a lot of the day-to-day ardor in terms of the legalities and so on. But I want to emphasise, in the Australian version of my supervisory concept, I'm not suggesting that the board would have no responsibility. I feel very strongly that one would have a supervisory role to see, first you've got to choose the CEO,
yes,
who presumably would be the chairman of the management board,
yep,
and you've got to watch that CEO very carefully, got to watch the management board, but at the same time, the delineation of responsibilities, I think, would become clearer if we had two separate boards.
And how would you see the composition of the advisory board or the supervisory board?
I think the supervisory board would have all the things that we aspire to today, a diverse set of people, both in genders, backgrounds and geographies, people coming from different professions and different outlooks, and basically taking what management are putting up and testing it to see whether it's the right thing to do, to see whether it is good for all the stakeholders, and to see whether it's something that can point in the right direction going forward. At the same time, it has to be a group of people who are established in business and know what they're doing in business, because they do, as I said earlier, have a truly supervisory role of keeping an eye on what that management board is doing.
And in that supervisory board, I know you and I have had different discussions. One of those discussions is, should we have more chief execs or ex-chief execs on that board, or people with P&L experience? I think your comeback to me was, look at me, Greg, I started in law and I've built a successful career thus far in the boardroom. Are we getting this right, David? Because the argument is going backwards and forwards of the composition of the boards and the capability of the boards. I agree with your thoughts around diversity. But do you have any further thought on that sort of statement?
Well, I think the first thing is I start with needing diversity around the board table. And therefore, a board that doesn't have CEOs on it is a bad board. But a board that's got too many could also be a bad board. You need people coming from different areas. And I've said many times, and I've said this to you, Greg, that one of the worst boards I could conceive would be a board made up of people exactly the same as me. We'd probably all agree with each other or all violently disagree with each other, and I mean that cynically, but at the same time, I don't think we would get the diversity of thought, the diversity of testing, of thinking that is needed. I think that people who have no involvement in business can have some role around a board table, but you do need people who have general business experience, and that's where the CEO becomes quite desirable, because they have led companies and they understand it. So you always need some CEOs. They've had the experience. But you also need people who understand the law, who understand accounting, and maybe sometimes people who just understand life.
David, would the CEO be on the supervisory board?
I think the CEO should be on the supervisory board, because I think it creates, firstly, a camaraderie. What would be terrible would be that the supervisory board's decisions would not involve the CEO either in making them or indeed in the liability for them. So I'm pretty strong that the CEO would be a member, not the chair, but would be a member of the supervisory board.
And what's your peers' thoughts on this proposal?
Some think it's very wise. Others think that the supervisory board may be too peripherally involved in the business and not close enough to it. I feel very strongly there's a lot of criticism that comes of the model because people then read up on the German experience, which of course includes having representatives of staff and all sorts of other requirements. I feel we have to develop our own. And I think it's important that people, and I know you're doing this, Greg, that people start to just question, because questioning is good. What's a better model? And this is not to say the model we've got now needs to be jettisoned. It is simply to say, let's think, is there a better way of doing things?
David, how have you seen the boards best operate? Some boards take a key role in drafting the strategy. Some purely review it and maintain it with the chief executive and the executive team. Where does it begin for you and where does it end for you in that capacity regarding strategy? Because it does differ from different organisations.
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. If I take the analogy, say, of a tennis match, somebody has to serve the ball. And I feel very strongly that if the ball is not served by management, it's unlikely that it's going to be returned or dealt with vigour. So the way I like it is that management should put something up. I mean, they're at the coalface. They know what the staff are talking about. They're working in the business. So they serve the ball. But a good board takes that ball with a mixture of critical look, but at the same time encouragement. By the way, a board that just devours that ball and spits it out, I think is not a good board. And certainly they've got some difficulty in their relationship with the CEO. I think that management should serve it up. It should be really critically looked at, developed to be improved, and then hopefully everyone signs off on it. And if they don't, we should keep talking.
David, in talking about serving up strategies, a number of years ago at ANZ, the previous chief exec served up an interesting strategy which was well supported and was quite exciting during that period of time, which was a growth strategy in Asia. Times have changed and ANZ have adopted a different strategy under a new chief executive. What is your thoughts of where the board was sitting during this period of time? It's a major embarkment to Asia. You don't get many chances to succeed. 10 years or so was the period of time, and now it's slowing its growth down and maybe even retracting. That was under the watch of a board. Was that the appropriate sign-off on that strategy?
The first thing I would say is that I think the strategy at the time, and I wasn't there, but the strategy at the time was a good one. I think it was very clear that we had a good business in Australia. We had a CEO who had extremely good experience in Asia. And he basically said, which is, by the way, consistent with the 180-year experience of ANZ, because it's always been a trading bank and one throughout the world, not just in Australia. He said, let's look to Asia. And I think he was right, and I think the board was right to look for growth in that way. We haven't stopped that strategy. We have changed the strategy.
So what is that strategy, David?
Yeah, our strategy is basically to follow into other territories like Asia and so on, where we have expertise, where we have something else to add. So the strategy that was given to us in the past was a strategy that did a lot for a lot of things in a particular territory. To give you an example, we've withdrawn from consumer funding and so on in Asia.
Yes.
And basically, that is part of what was done there, and it was perfectly fine. That was their decision to have a look at that. We've decided, let's specialise in the areas where we can not dominate, but we can give a very good go of it and be a good competitor there because we know the Australian dollar. We can follow the trade flows from Australia. We're good on mining. We understand funding for particular projects. These sort of things are what we can follow and do well, and there should follow from that better margins when you're strong. And I would say I'd actually congratulate the people who came before us that they made us strong in Asia. And they may have, sure, gone into areas which weren't as lucrative as they may have thought. But that's what business is about.
Taking risk.
That has risk. The result of what they did is that in the areas we're now specialising in Asia, we've got a very good presence and a very good standing and a very good set of people.
And the new chief exec has brought in a new focus around agile. What does agile mean to David Gonski?
Agile for me is very exciting. Basically, as we call it NWOW, new ways of working. And I've got to say, I've sat through a number of the sessions now, and what I like is that the concept is really to take either a stream of problems or a stream within the business and bring people in from different parts of the business. In the past, the way we've all run our businesses is, we've got the treasury function and we've got the consumer function and so on.
Yep.
This idea, which is, when you think about it, so logical, is to bring experts from all those fields together, take on either a problem or a concept and solve it. Mm-hmm. And I've watched the way they've gone about things, and it's marvellous. It's marvellous in a number of ways. First, they've come up with some very good suggestions. Mm-hmm. Second, it's a motivator. People love taking a problem and putting in their, in the old nomenclature, tuppence and getting it done. And the third thing is it builds a camaraderie across the whole bank. And I suppose, if I may allow myself a fourth thing, it develops leaders because you basically see people working with other people and you see the dynamics of how that works.
I guess the question I was going to ask you, David, it's around sustainability for the long term. We've got a captured market of about, 25 million people in Australia, 4 pillar banks, and you're going down this policy. Others may argue there's a fair amount of restructuring and job changing as a result. Is it the sustainable growth strategy for the long term?
I think the first thing is that every company has to look at their own growth path. And I think it would be wrong for me to talk about banks as a group and how they can get growth and whatever. We've made it very clear at ANZ that the first step is that we're going to become a simpler, more focused bank. And we're doing quite well, I think, in doing that simplification. That's for others to judge, but I think that Shane and the team have done a good job in doing that. We have to get that cleared, and then obviously right through we're talking about where we see areas of growth. And obviously as the future unfolds, that hopefully will become clear.
David, where do you see the relationship with business and government?
I think that the relationship between business and government is an extremely important thing. And I wish for the world that we all do work much more seamlessly. One of the things, and I know we've talked about this before, Greg, one of the things I love about America is that in a successful career, people move from business into government, into academia, and then back into business.
Absolutely, yes.
Here, I can name about 4 people who have done that, and by the way, most of them have done it well, who have actually moved between the various sectors. We need to build a culture when people are prepared to do that. Business people are prepared to assist government and perhaps give their views on things. To take an example, as I did in education, school education, government people are prepared to come in and work with business and perhaps, have a time in business. And I think over time, if we can break down the barriers, we will be much stronger.
Why did you take on Gonski 2.0? Why did you do it?
Well, you're asking me to do why I took on Gonski 2.0. It's because I took on Gonski 1.0.
Yep. And why did you take 1.0?
Well, that's a much more difficult question. I suppose, being honest, there was a mixture of flattery and opportunity. I remember absolutely vividly getting the call from Julia Gillard. I don't know to this day, you should ask her, why she chose me. And I remember asking her if I could have a couple of hours to think about it. And I remember talking to my wife and thinking, why would you choose me? I'm a businessman. It was a funding review, so that had some logic, but I was Chancellor of a university and Chairman of a boys' school, but I'd never taught school students and never been an educator. But I thought about it, and I have to be honest, I realised, which is I think what will turn out, that this was the biggest donation I could make to my country and probably the only thing I'll be remembered for, if I'm remembered at all, when I'm gone.
So you present 1.0, which then moves to 2.0. What was the big difference in what you achieved from 1.0 to 2.0, and how have you found the feedback on 2.0?
Well, it depends, by the way, how you do your numbering. Gonski 2.0 had nothing to do with me. It was an interpretation of Gonski 1.0 by the Turnbull government, and, that was theirs, and that's what they named. You could call the second report I did Gonski 3.0.
Okay.
And if your question is, where is that at the moment, that's still being discussed. We gave the report some months ago now. It's a report that's got nothing to do with funding, which is what Gonski 1.0 was all about.
Absolutely.
It is designed to perhaps assist in how to spend the money. That's as close as it comes to money. It was a real pleasure to lead the team. It was a big team that put it together. I think we put some very good things there, but it's for those involved in the field, for the state governments and the federal governments who are going to look at it, and indeed the independents and so on, that's the independent schools, to see whether there's something in it and whether it's worthwhile.
So is it a blueprint or a manifesto if I read the press, David?
We didn't design it to be a manifesto.
Okay.
We acknowledge right from the start of the report that there are many different views, and we chose not to go down to the nitty-gritty of how you teach reading or whatever. That experts in that field would be better at. We decided to make a number of recommendations which we're pretty comfortable, if brought in together, would be a great advantage in solving the problem. And the problem is, by the way, that we're not, if you look at an international situation, our kids are not actually doing as well in these international tests as we would like them to do. And there's been quite a drop since the year 2000. We show that in the report.
David, why aren't we performing that well?
I think what we decided in, if I may call it Gonski 1.0, was that what's happened is that there, or I might call it as a banker jaws, that our good kids, and when I say good, I mean good educationally advantaged kids, do all right, right? They may not do as well as they used to internationally, but they're doing all right. The problem, though, is that there are this wonderful group of kids, really intelligent kids, who are what we called educationally disadvantaged. Mm-hmm. And we designed a system in the past which didn't put the money, the concentration on overcoming these areas of disadvantage. And I can tell you absolutely, I have no doubts, that if we assist a child who's educationally disadvantaged, they may be the most brilliant and they may be the ones that, blast off into the stratosphere and cause all our numbers to rise. So the essence of Gonski 1.0 was to have needs-based funding, which, by the way, has been implemented. We can debate whether it's enough money or not. That's a different thing. But needs-based funding. And needs-based funding is on the conjecture, and I think it's right, that if we can bring all the kids up to having some sort of equality in what they're doing, it'll be much better for the country and fantastic for these bright kids.
As a nation, do we value education enough based on your findings?
I think in Australia we value education very highly. And I think in Australia, by the way, we've got a good education system and we've got some fantastic people working in the system. However, it could be better. And what we've itemised first in the first report is that by putting attention to those kids who are educationally disadvantaged, we can improve it. And in the second report, we put a whole concept of how we believe you should be improving things. To take a quick example, perhaps looking at performance rather than just saying somebody didn't get to reading whatever they had to read within a month, 2 months or 6 months, just rather compare, well, have they actually grown in what they're doing? And if everybody is growing, that means the intelligent one who's really at the top already has to also grow. If everybody's growing, we think it'll be better.
So what's the steps from here, David? It's going to be more debate. Are we actually going to get to some conclusive outcomes in the next period of time?
We have, I'm sorry to go back to the tennis analogy again.
Yeah. You've served the ball.
I've served the ball.
Okay.
Our team.
The ball's in the court.
Yes, we've had some very good meetings with the state ministers. It's really up to them.
You talk about being remembered for giving. You've given a lot during your life to other people. Is that part of the DNA?
Oh, I think definitely. I mean, I still do see myself as an immigrant, even though I was only 7 when I came here. I spoke to somebody the other day who had a really hard immigration, came at a 30-year-old, no money, no real tertiary education, did very well, by the way. I came as a 7-year-old boy, and all I had to do was follow the 6'1" guy in front of me, who was quite big, my dad. I didn't have any of the worries, but I still see myself as an immigrant, very grateful to be in Australia, wanting desperately to give back to this country and wanting also, like most immigrants, to make sure that we are successful, which means every morning you get up with another battle, namely to prove yourself through the day.
And David, where do you think we are in the immigration debate? There seems to be left, it seems to be right, but actually are we thinking seriously enough about the quality of the people, the opportunities for the people coming in, or is it becoming very, very targeted?
Yeah, I think it's not for me to, make statements of where we are in a debate. But as you'd expect, I believe very strongly in immigration. And I think the immigrants that have come to Australia, and by the way, I'm not sure there's anybody here other than the wonderful Indigenous people who isn't an immigrant. We've all brought things with us, some good, some bad. And I think Australia does generally do very well with immigration, and I think we should believe in it, not seek to diminish it in any way.
You've been a mentor for many. You were mentored by the likes of Justice Kim Santow, Frank Lowy, Fred Street and Sarah Anderson. What were the key learnings you got when you were a young person coming through?
Well, the key learnings I got, firstly, can I say a key learning is it's good to have a mentor. I feel very strongly about that, and I believe, and I'm involved with an organisation that's doing that everybody should have at least one mentor in their life. You mentioned 3 of those people were enormous mentors to me. One in my profession, Kim Santow, one in business, Frank Lowy, and one, Fred Street, a most marvellous man who's still around, he's 94, I think, in philanthropy. He was the man, by the way, who taught me that just giving is not the right thing to do. That when you give, you've got to expect from it what you're expecting when you give. So in other words, don't just give the money, follow it up. See if you can help it. Make sure that it's going to the right cause that you expected, that there are KPIs, if it's a large enough sum, that in fact it performs. And I must say, he's the first one that opened my eyes to the fact that so many people are so diligent in how they make money and invest in things, and then just give it away without giving that same diligence.
So how do you measure success, David?
Well, I think that success is a very relative term, and I actually think it's a very individual thing. Each of us at times feels happy about what's happened. And, if you asked me what would I wish for my children, I would wish that they would be happy. And the component of happiness is feeling successful, whether it be in their day job, in the way they run their families, or whatever.
David, a couple of last questions. The economy. Are we going in the right direction? Are you confident? Are you bullish over the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, I tell you one thing I learnt as a lawyer. Never, ever tell anybody whether you're bullish or whatever, because basically someone might invest, dare I say it, on what you say. I feel the way I look at business is that my job is to do the best where I am within the conditions that come. And I'm very happy to leave it to the economists to make predictions, and usually they do it with much better verve and excitement than I can muster.
Do you think as a nation, do you think we're looking at talent in the right way? I think you talked about at one stage in the boardroom, particularly around technology. Are we exposing ourselves as a nation to the right technologies? Are we exposing ourselves to ongoing learning? Are we challenging ourselves in the right appropriate manner if we are going to grow the economy and achieve growth overall?
I think that it's dangerous to look at a whole economy. I really do.
Okay.
I know people who are looking at the latest technologies with such enormous insights that, the jaw just drops open when you listen to them. I know others who don't really want new technologies. I think they're wrong, but that's what they do. Everybody to their own. I think Australia is a pretty open situation, that we've got different views, we talk a lot about them, but on the whole we do accept new technologies, and we do work, in my opinion, in a very sophisticated way in most of the markets we're involved in.
If you were to take the young David Gonski aside, what advice would you have given him many years back?
Well, I think he was right not to become a brain surgeon. I really believe that. And I think there's probably many...
There's plenty of blood spilled in the boardroom.
Well, I was going to say, I think there are many potential patients who are very thankful that I didn't become a brain surgeon. And I think similarly, as an architect, I probably would have been pretty bad. I don't know that I'm artistic enough. Having said that, I think if I was talking to the young David Gonski, I would say, keep your dreams, keep working, and every day should be a hard-working day. I don't think it should be just looking backwards or indeed dreaming for the future. You've got to be practical.
You still keep the hard work ethic?
Oh, absolutely. But then I think that's, I don't believe that I would be as happy sitting on a beach, even though I've now allowed myself 2 analogies for tennis. I'm probably the worst tennis player that's ever played. So I'm not blessed with a sporting ability. So work is something I love.
What's the legacy, David, you want to be remembered for? Is it the education?
That's a very good question, because it also, you have to ask the question, who is the person or the persons that you want to think about your legacy? I particularly would love my kids to have the same wonderful feeling I have for my late father, who saved lives, was a true professional person, didn't really care in terms of material things for himself, except for his little boat, which was very little. And basically, I would like that. That would be really the epitaph I was looking for.
David, it's been an absolute pleasure today. Thanks for sharing with us your dreams, your aspirations, your work, your focus on helping others. To everybody out there, thanks again, David. Thank you very much.
A pleasure. Thanks.
You've been listening to No Limitations.